This entire proceeding is ended.
With that gavel, Chairman Joseph Biden ended 3 of the most remarkable days in the history of the Congress. Senators investigating allegations of unwanted sexual advances by a Supreme Court nominee had waded out into uncharted and often seamy waters, hoping to arrive at the truth. But when the hearings ended at 2 o'clock this morning, 33 hours and 22 witnesses after they began, the Senate was right back where it started, having to weigh his word against hers. Anita Hill, a University of Oklahoma law professor, worked for Clarence Thomas during the early 1980s at the Department of Education and at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee to tell her story.
His conversations were very vivid. He spoke about acts that he had seen in pornographic films involving such matters as women having sex with animals and films showing group sex or rape scenes. He talked about pornographic materials depicting individuals with large penises or large breasts involved in various sex acts. On several occasions, Thomas told me graphically of his own sexual prowess. Because I was extremely uncomfortable talking about sex with him at all, and particularly in such a graphic way, I told him that I did not want to talk about these subjects.
Judge Clarence Thomas had appeared to be within days of confirmation to the Supreme Court when the Anita Hill story broke. Now he was forced to return to the Judiciary Committee to defend himself, and did so with a blistering attack against his accuser, his opponents, and against the committee itself.
In the fall of 1991, a stunned and confused nation watched a law professor charge a Supreme Court nominee with blatant sexual harassment on primetime television. Stunned because never before had there been this kind of media attention to sexual harassment. Confused because the lines can seem unclear and sexual harassment is inextricably aligned to perception. Shortly thereafter, the nightly news and national magazines carried stories of widespread sexual harassment and discrimination in the military. Those events brought to light something that millions of Americans already knew. Sexual harassment and retaliation is a pervasive, destructive, social, legal, and ethical problem. And it is a problem which workers have not escaped. Sexual harassment, a form of sex discrimination, and retaliation for reporting it is one of the most persistent and destructive problems in the U.S. workplace. While potentially a problem for both sexes, the majority of sexual harassment is from men to women, and few working women have not experienced sexual harassment. Although sexual harassment is clearly illegal, it continues despite the high cost to the employee and the harassed individual. And despite the protections of the law, many who have been harassed do not bring complaints. Sex role stereotyping, distribution of power, and socialization are among the chief factors contributing to sexual harassment. Filing charges can be humiliating. Victims may feel their charges will be ignored or downplayed, or they may be accused of behavior that invited the offensive conduct. They may be ridiculed, face hostility or retaliation, poor work assignments, reduced hours, poor evaluations, or even the loss of a job. Still others don't know their rights, are confused about where the lines are drawn, or simply don't know what to do. What is clear is that sexual harassment and retaliation is against the law. Since 1964, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act has prohibited discrimination in employment conditions because of an individual's sex. In 1976, it was acknowledged that Title VII also prohibits sexual harassment as a form of sex discrimination. Unlawful hostile environment harassment may occur even where there has been no tangible job detriment, but where sexually harassing conduct is so severe or pervasive that it alters an employee's working conditions.
In this insider-exclusive Justice in America Network TV special,
Our news team goes behind the headlines in sex abuse nightmare Michelle Chun Fook's story to meet with Paul Woods of the Paul Woods Law Firm, who successfully represented Yolanda Cooper and Michelle Chun Fook, two former Seattle Public Library security guards, who said a manager kissed them both and didn't investigate a coworker who held one of them on his lap and spanked her. Paul Woods successfully settled the case for $220,000. Unfortunately, as a settlement condition, Michelle and Yolanda both had to leave their jobs at the Seattle Central Library downtown and never work for the city of Seattle again. The manager still works for the city in a different department and wasn't disciplined, although the coworker was fired. Yolanda Cooper and Michelle Chun Fook said the city failed to support them, adding to the pain of the harassment. Here's Michelle Chun Fook to tell her nightmare story.
I worked at the Seattle Public Library as a security officer until one day I complained that I was racially discriminated and sexually abused, and then I was forced out of my job. I dealt with this harassments for many years. Coming to work was too hard. I was scared to get fired because I came forward. The final thing I have to say: don't be quiet. Come forward. Have other women support you. It wasn't easy in the beginning, but now I stand tall.
This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Seattle, Washington. It's my great pleasure to introduce Paul Woods to the show. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, Steve.
How is Seattle these days?
It's in a little bit of an uproar.
So today we are here talking a little bit about your law firm and this really landmark case that you settled on behalf of your two clients. Tell our audience a little bit about what your law firm specializes in.
My law firm specializes in helping employees who've been mistreated by their employers. I look for folks who've basically had their voice taken away, people who've been threatened by their employer when they say, hey, you got to give me my paycheck. And they say, I'm not going to give you your paycheck. I think you might be an immigrant. I might call ICE on you. I have cases like that. Really? It happens more often than you'd think here in the Seattle area. Folks who've been sexually harassed at work, people who've been racially harassed, people who've been told, I don't want you here because I only want people of my same race working at this hotel or at this store. You'd think in this day and age it wouldn't happen. You'd think it wouldn't happen in a city like Seattle. But I'm sad to say business is booming.
Today we are here talking about your successful representation of two clients, Yolanda Cooper and Michelle Chun Fook, who worked at the Seattle Public Library, and they ran into problems with their boss. Tell us a little about your clients.
Sure. So two wonderful women. Really the reason I do what I do is for people like them. Michelle and Yolanda were both security guards at the Seattle Public Library.
And that was a good job, right?
It was a very good job. A union position, had good pay, good benefits. It was a position where they could both spend their time helping folks. A lot of homeless people here in the Seattle area come into the library. They're looking for a place to get out of the elements, a place maybe where they can sit down, they can get on a computer, they can apply for jobs. A lot of folks who just are looking to better themselves and need a safe place to do it. Michelle and Yolanda, from the first moment I met them, told me that's why they did what they did. They wanted to help people. Reminded me a lot of why I do what I do. Unfortunately, in their jobs, they came across a coworker who seemed to have issues with people of color, patrons of color, especially folks who were homeless, black male homeless patrons of color. And Michelle and Yolanda told me that they'd spent years reporting to their supervisors that this man would target these black male patrons of color, that he would eject them out into the streets. He'd threaten to call the police on them. He'd use racial slurs with them. And they knew this because these folks, these men were coming up to them saying, I didn't do anything wrong. Why am I getting kicked out here? Why does this guy keep coming after us? And so Michelle and Yolanda, they both reported to up the chain of command what was happening. Problem was, their manager was buddies with this guy, and not only would he bury the complaints, but he would start to threaten folks who complained about him or about his friend, make not so subtle threats against people's jobs. And for Michelle and Yolanda, these jobs were the culmination of years of hard work. In Yolanda's case, she had been homeless. She got in a program through the Obama administration and worked her way up to get this job. And so, I mean, these were her people. She saw herself in these patrons of color, homeless patrons of color that were being ejected for doing nothing wrong. And in Michelle's case, she's somebody who has spent her life and still spends her life trying to help people, whether it's in her family, whether it's just somebody walking down the street. She's about as caring and giving a person as you'll ever find. So for them, they decided to put it all on the line, to risk their jobs, to stand up and keep fighting back against this coworker of theirs.
And now this coworker was also doing something else with them too, wasn't he?
Over time, over years, when nothing happened as people complained about him, he started to grow bold, and he started sexually harassing Michelle. It started with comments about her clothes, saying that she was wearing what he would call hooker boots, things like that. Said it in front of his boss, who just laughed and repeated it. Eventually, he grabbed Michelle one day at work, pulled her onto his lap, and she hopped up and said, "Don't do that," runs away. Well, nothing happened. So time goes by, and eventually he grows bolder. And at a work event in front of a coworker, he grabbed Michelle, pulled her over his lap, and repeatedly slapped her on the behind over and over again against her will. He sexually assaulted her at work in front of a coworker. He never denied that he did it. She jumped up, ran away crying. And what did the library do? Well, his pal, his boss, the manager, found out about it and turned it into a joke, laughed about how this guy gave Michelle birthday spankings, came into a room where Michelle was crying. Michelle had told her supervisor what happened, a supervisor underneath this manager. Supervisor said, "This isn't okay. We got to bring in the manager. We have to talk about what happened. We got to do something about this." Well, the manager walks in, and the first thing he says is, "I heard you got your birthday spankings," and starts laughing about it. This is what happened to Michelle when she stood up on behalf of other people, when she stood up on behalf of herself.
Right, not caring about her feelings whatsoever.
Oh, not at all.
So at all times, she knew that they might retaliate against her, and she needed this job, right?
Exactly.
So eventually, you were brought in, you sued the city, right?
I did.
Named the employees, right?
Yep, named them.
Do you know the names of the employees?
Bob Gotchi and Joe Fithian.
Now, Joe Fithian's still working for the city of Seattle, isn't he?
Right, he was the manager.
He's the one who did nothing.
Exactly.
Okay. What happened with the lawsuit?
Well, with the lawsuit, I can't say the exact amounts. I know that it's already been, I know that the library put it out and gave a copy of a settlement agreement to the press, so I know it's out there. But I'm not supposed to say exactly what happened. But eventually we were able to resolve the case after about 1.5 years of litigation.
And what was the key element, the smoking gun, if you will, that was enabled you to resolve the case before going to trial? The
smoking gun was the supervisor, the guy who cared enough to let Michelle sit in his office while she was crying about what happened, the guy who brought in the manager and said, "This isn't okay." That man was stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, he cared about Michelle. He's somebody, a person of color himself. If he was a white person, he probably would have been a manager long ago. But he was...
And he's still working for the city.
He is still working for the city, still in that same role.
Yeah, so he was brave, he was courageous.
He was.
He came forward to tell the truth.
Exactly. This is a man who had reported to the manager, his boss, about Bob Gotchi's behavior towards patrons in the business.
Who, Gotchian was fired, wasn't he? eventually fired, wasn't he?
I wouldn't use the term fired. He was let go after I helped Michelle obtain a restraining order as part of a criminal charge that she filed against Bob Gauci. When the city would not fire him, would not get him out of the workplace in any sort of permanent, long-lasting way. They reassigned him to go to some other libraries, but he'd still come to work where she was. Michelle talked to me, and we decided to go to the Seattle city prosecutor's office, and a city prosecutor cared enough about what happened to Michelle to file charges, and as part of that case, there was a restraining order entered. So Bob was not allowed to be at the library anymore.
Impossible for him to work there.
Exactly. And when that happened, then suddenly the city was okay letting him go. But I've never heard the terms fired or anything like that. To my knowledge, he's still eligible to be hired back by the city, unlike Michelle, who is not eligible to ever work for the city of Seattle again.
And that was part of their settlement, right?
Exactly.
These are the people that were wronged. These are the people that eventually you successfully settled the case against the city, but they are ineligible to work for the city even though they blew the whistle, right?
Exactly.
It sounds kind of, not right.
It sounds completely not right to me, Steve.
Well, fortunately, we have Michelle with us today, so we're going to bring her on right now. It's my great pleasure to introduce Michelle Chun Fook to the show. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Hi.
Thank you very much for coming here. I know it's difficult, and we're going to first of all, how are you today?
I've had bad days, but today's a good day, yeah.
Take us back to working at the Seattle Public Library. It was a great job, right? You loved it, right? How long did you work there?
Approximately almost 8 years.
Wow. And you were looking at this as, maybe being the end of, you're retiring from it, right?
That's right.
And some things came along, incidents came along, which you were very unhappy with, which, by the way, I admire your courage to come forward because enough was enough. Tell our audience exactly, what happened with your immediate supervisor. What was his name again?
Chris Hogan.
Yeah. What happened to your immediate supervisor when you reported these things? Tell our audience, please. What was it like being in your shoes?
Chris is pretty much the go-to guy out of all the managers or whoever was in charge there. Yeah. He would get things done as much as he could for us. When this incident happened, or any of the things that happened, we would go to Chris, and he would take it to the upper management, and nothing would get done.
What exactly were they doing with you and Yolanda that required you to come to their attention?
Many incidents. And one of them is him picking on Bob, picking on patrons of color, homeless patrons of color, and removing them from the library.
He'd kick them out.
He'll kick them out.
What would he say to them? You don't belong
He
here.
would say, enjoy the weather, and it was like freezing cold, 30 degrees. Yeah.
What exactly is the policy at a public library? Can anybody come in there at any time? Doesn't matter whether you're homeless or whatever?
Absolutely.
You just have to conduct yourself in a professional way.
That's right. But there's always other ways to go around it.
Yeah.
Our last thing we want is anybody leaving. That's a safe haven for them.
How big is the library, by the way?
11 floors.
11? Wow, it's huge.
Yeah.
So how many people would come in there every day?
Approximately, probably, I would say a lot of tourists, so give or take probably 300 to 400.
Wow, that's a lot of people. So when you started reporting his discrimination against people of color, particularly homeless people, right? Did anybody ever say to you, you need to keep your mouth shut and don't report this anymore?
No.
Okay.
It was more of a
subtle retaliation?
Yeah.
Like how?
Us not having the shift that we wanted, or
not getting a promotion, someone.
No, never getting a promotion.
Yeah. And you were eligible for promotions in 8 years, right?
Yes. Yes. Me saying.
What about performance reviews? Did you have them every year?
Yeah.
And what did they say on the performance review?
Well, in mine's, I got sick a lot because of the the people that come in and out of the library. My immune system, I was trying to get used to that in the beginning. He told me probably this job was not good for me.
Right.
Probably it wouldn't, for my health-wise, you probably should start looking for another job.
Mhm.
And at that point, I was already saying things about what was going on in the library.
Right.
So yeah, my job was put at risk.
Right. When did it become personal with you and Yolanda? When they started, sexually harassing you?
It really got personal the day when he told me that I was wearing hooker boots.
Okay.
And to me, that sounds like me being a prostitute.
Right.
I had brought that forward to my supervisor, Chris, who took it up to level 2. But see, when I heard it and I heard the manager laugh about it, I knew then it wasn't going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
It was things like that that I started losing trust in the manager. That it wasn't going to, things that we would say was not going to go anywhere.
Right.
Period. Mm-hmm. All we had was each other there. The crew. All we could do was talk to each other.
How many women were there on the as security guards at the library?
About 4.
4.
Majority men.
All the rest men. How did the rest of the men treat you?
They were respectful.
Were they?
Yeah.
Okay, so you had good vibes there.
Yes.
I understand there came a point in time when your immediate supervisor started touching you or kissing you or that sort of thing, right?
My manager.
Yeah.
One day he came into the office while I was on the computer.
Yeah.
And before leaving, he leaned forward towards me, and I was doing a security report, and kissed my head. I don't know what that meant. Yeah. And walked out. Didn't say a word. And I had no idea that this was going on with somebody else also.
Oh, really?
But she got kissed on a cheek. And then he left the office. And both of us didn't know that this had happened to us. Until one day, she was telling me what was happening. And I told her, me too.
Yeah.
And we promised each other that if this was to happen again, we were going to come forward.
Right.
And say everything.
And you did. And then what happened?
No one listened.
And how'd that make you feel? Were you scared of going to work?
Yeah. I didn't want to see him.
And then you were scared of losing your job.
Yeah.
So it took a lot of courage to actually end up with a lawsuit, right? To sue them.
Absolutely.
What happened when you sued them?
I still felt like the victim.
Mm-hmm.
We can no longer work for the city of Seattle.
Right. Paul successfully settled your case, but one of the requirements was you could never work for the city of Seattle again. That's insane. I mean, it's almost like they're punishing the victim, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you have to say to other victims out there who are experiencing the same kind of problem, what they should do? I mean, you went through hell and back. They should come forward, right?
Absolutely.
That's why you're here today, right?
That's right.
To give them the courage, right, to do that, because it can mean the loss of your job.
Yeah.
Have you been able to work since that time?
No.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you, Steve.
And inspiring other people to come forward. And I hope when the time is appropriate, you get the job that you're looking for in the future. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Paul, let me ask you a question. For our audience, what exactly is sexual harassment? How do you know if you've been, sounds stupid, but how do you know if you've been sexually harassed?
That's a good question. A lot of people don't understand sexual harassment, at least in the workplace, is really any time that you feel uncomfortable in the workplace because of sexual things someone else is doing.
Could be comments.
Could be comments.
Could be actions.
Could be actions. Right. It could be touching. It could be a coworker. It could technically even be a customer. So you're working at a store and a customer is coming in and doing things, making sexual comments.
Yeah.
If you notify your employer, or if your employer finds out about it, If your employer knows that there are some sort of sexually charged words or actions that are making you uncomfortable, that could be sexual harassment. What counts as sexual harassment depends on the person. It's not the harasser. It doesn't matter if the harasser means to be making you uncomfortable or not. What matters is if you are uncomfortable. If you are uncomfortable and a reasonable person in your shoes could feel, yeah, that would make me uncomfortable too, that is sexual harassment.
Yeah. Now, typically, the right course of action is the employee will tell their immediate supervisor.
Correct.
They should do this. This is the chain of command.
Right.
But in reality, some supervisors don't take this seriously enough to do anything about it, correct?
Well, not only is that true, but sometimes you'll face retaliation.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to get into. And that's what they have to look at, because like in the case of Yolanda and Michelle, they had very good jobs. They had a pension plan, they had, they're making good money, and they were doing work that they love. So they had to look at, okay, what are we going to do if we sue the city? Are they going to fire us? What are they going to do? I mean, eventually, yes, they were compensated, but the victimizers, if you will, are still, one of them is still employed, and they can't work for the city anymore, which, as I said before, is totally wrong. So what should, if you go to your immediate supervisor and they're not taking any action, what should you do as an employee?
Well, you should raise your complaints to as many people above your supervisor as you can. Yeah. You should raise your complaints in writing. I would send emails so that there's a record of it.
Very good point.
What a lot of employers will do is they'll want to protect the harasser for a number of reasons. Maybe it's a friend of the supervisor. Maybe the company is just afraid that if they admit that this person did something wrong, they could be on the hook financially. So what a lot of companies do, from what I see, is they'll deny that you ever complained in the first place. They'll make some fake reasons up for firing you, or they'll just make your life miserable and push you out the door.
So the lesson here is document everything.
Exactly. Yeah. Make it very clear that you have complained about sexual harassment. Right. If you're worried about repercussions, talk to a good attorney, somebody who can take very official action for you, somebody who can go file a complaint on your behalf to the federal government, even while you're still employed. It can be so difficult to understand. Even your own employee handbook may have special rules that say you have to go to this person or that person if you want to complain about sexual harassment. A lawyer can help navigate that stuff for you and really take care of you. If you feel like you're alone, if you feel like you are trapped in some sort of convoluted maze created by your employer to protect the employer, not you, that's when people like me step in. You're not alone.
Well, congratulations for the result that you got for them. One final question. You have a lot of people who contact you and say they have legitimate complaints in this area. How do you determine whether they're credible or not?
So I trust my gut as much as I can on folks. And if I get a good feeling about somebody, you can usually hear it in somebody's voice, see it in their eyes. Then I'll talk to their witnesses, I'll look at their documents, I'll ask them to give me just a little bit of more information. And ultimately, it really comes down to whether I look at somebody's face, I hear their voice, and I really feel that they're hurting. And if they are, then I'll go down that road with you. We don't know exactly where it will go, but you won't go down that road alone.
Well, you go down fighting, won't you?
I will.
Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.